Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I'm your host, Benedikt. If you're already a listener, thank you. Welcome for coming back. If you are new to the show, welcome. So stoked to have you. Please know that this is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you consume podcasts, but also in video form on YouTube if you weren't aware. So just go to YouTube, search for the Self-Recording Band, and you can watch all our episodes there. Today, we want to break down the biggest home recording mistakes that we've seen from working with self-recording artists this month, so you don't have to make these same mistakes. We've done an episode like that earlier this year, I think in January. And it's time to do another one because it's the end of the month, at least at the time of this recording. And there's always some things that we come across, some pretty common things that we notice, and we want to share them with you so you don't have to make these same mistakes. And today I'm here again with my wonderful co-host and friend, Malcolm Owen Flood. Hello, how are you?
Hey, Benny, I'm great, man. First off, yes, we want this episode to help you not make the same mistakes, but actually, Benny and I just love to complain about things that get thrown on the desk all the time.
Yep, that is right. That is correct.
We deserve this.
Yeah, so if you've been working with us, be ready to be called out. No, we don't call it. We won't throw you under the bus. If you recognize, or if you think we're talking about you when you're listening to this, we probably are. We're not saying your name, but it's.
But we're not
it's
only talking about you.
No,
we're bringing these up because it's happened multiple times. These are common issues, and honestly, there's one of these, at least two. I'm gonna confess, two of these are things that I've done, and I feel bad about. It's mistakes that I've made in the past too, and I see other people make, and we want to eliminate that from your future. That's the goal. But first off, Benny ran an enormous amount, just insane distances over mountains and valleys, and I'm not even joking. Benny, how'd it go, man?
Man, it went so well. Last time I talked about it was the last episode was before the race, and I wasn't sure if I'm going to finish or not, and I was prepared to drop out during the race or whatever, but it went so well, exactly as planned, actually. So I had my strategy, the pacing, between the aid stations, and what I'm going to eat when, and the nutrition, everything.
Remind the audience how far this run was, because
it was 68 kilometers, and it said 2,500 meters of elevation gain. My watch says it was 2,800, so a little more than that. But anyway, a lot.
Yeah, a lot.
and so my goal was just to finish. And the dream goal sort of was to place sort of middle of the pack and finish in under 10 hours. That was sort of the dream, but I didn't really think it was realistic because I only finished 70% of my training plan this year because of, life got in the way and stuff.
Coming to Canada, going to weddings.
Yeah, exactly. That, for example. And so finishing was really the goal, but it went so well and exactly as planned that I managed to achieve both. So I finished in 9 hours and 43 minutes, and I placed 42nd out of, I think, 95 male runners, which is awesome for my first ultra. I really love that. The first 10 people or so are insane. There's professional runners and world-class athletes basically there. And so
okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Anybody that can run that amount of distance is a world-class athlete. Let's be clear.
I don't know.
You might not be in the Olympics, but you're in the top 1% of fitness people.
Maybe I don't know. Yeah, but in within the hobby runners, there I did pretty well, I think, and it was my first ultra, so I'm beyond excited. It was just such an amazing day, and I didn't even suffer that much. I expected it to be so bad. Because it was unknown territory, after anything longer than 50K or so was completely unknown to me. And I expected, to be walking the past couple of kilometers or whatever. But the last 5K or so from, past the 60K mark, I was still doing sub 6 minute kilometers. And I was very surprised that this worked out. And so I felt strong the entire time, didn't have... it was hard, of course, but it was not the amount of suffering that I expected. And so I know I could do it even faster. It's just that my legs and everything, I have to get used to that distance, just the pounding, it just hurt at the end. So I could have gone for longer, but it was just painful. Yeah. So that was really the only thing. And but other than that, I had a blast. I enjoyed the entire day. strategy was great. It was cool that I didn't overpace. I started at the very back of the pack, and then which was also good because the entire race I was just overtaking people, and which was mentally really cool. To sort of make progress and move forward and see everyone else suffer while I was feeling pretty well. So yeah, it was just an amazing day. My kids were greeting me at the finish line, and it was just awesome. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Super happy to hear that. Well done. It's amazing and terrifying that you're capable of that. And
thank you, man. Thank you. Let's see what's next. I don't know. It's like I'm already thinking about the next adventure, so we'll see. Yeah. And it's like awesome. Today is day 5 after the race, and walking still hurts, so it's going to take a while until I get back into running. But I think next week or something I will start slowly again, and then I'm actually looking forward to the off season now because it was a lot of training, and I'm looking forward to more casual, shorter, fun runs and not the training plan. Yeah,
that's great. Well, for some music related banter, I'm doing a show tonight.
Oh, wow.
The day of this recording. Yeah. So that'll be fun. I borrowed back this Evertune guitar I had that I sold to one of our podcast listeners and who came to the meetup, Derek Madden, and he let me borrow it back so I could play the show with it. And I regret selling it so much. So just a reminder to our audience: don't sell gear that you need. That was stupid. Maybe need's a strong word, but Evertune guitars.
Yeah.
I consider them a need now.
Yes, totally. And that was such a beautiful guitar in general, like not just the Evertune. I mean, I haven't played it, but I saw it, and it was the dream, actually. So
it was silly. I'll see if they'll sell it back to me.
Why did you sell it again?
Well, I'm not really playing anymore, like shows anymore, and I'm not producing bands anymore. I got it for the bands I produce, just to make their guitar tracking more affordable and efficient. So it just didn't have a lot of use, but
okay.
It is.
But you
so
borrowed
nice.
it for the show now. Yeah,
I borrowed it for the show, and like I don't plan to continue doing a lot of shows, but I think Evertunes are so good that even it's almost like the less you're doing, the more you need one, because it just makes it like one less thing to worry about. And you're not playing guitar very much, your intonation's a little shaky. And this thing just is like easy mode. It's just like, oh, I'm good at this because my guitar doesn't go out of tune.
Yeah, for sure. But the last show with Darian, because it's Darian Gerard, right? The show tonight.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
The last show you played with her was the Les Paul, right?
Yes, my red Les Paul I brought out for Lake Town Shakedown, which Benny came to when he was in Canada here.
Yeah.
And that was fine, but I actually did notice that I was having a little bit of the infamous Gibson G-string tuning issues outside. It's tricky to keep your guitar in tune on an outdoor stage or in an indoor club for that matter. It's just always hard.
Yeah. What is it tonight? It's probably indoors, right? This time of the year.
Indoor club, yeah. It should be hot, sweaty, loud. Should be good.
Awesome, really cool. Did you play with her since then? Is it the first one since then? Or?
No, we honestly just did our first jam since that show last night. So going in.
All right. Really cool. Exciting. Yeah, so I got some music banter actually as well.
Oh, great.
Because it's been a very rare new gear day for me this week. So I haven't bought stuff in quite a while, but this week I have, and I'm excited about it. So I got this thing here. Can you show this into the camera? It's a meter, TC Electronic, the Clarity M meter thing.
Oh, cool.
That I always wanted, because now I don't have to have the analyzer as a plugin open on my screen all the time, and it's always open, and I can not only analyze stuff in the DAW, but also Spotify and everything else, and I can see the loudness and the analyzer and everything else I want to see on this thing. And it has a few cool features that I don't have in any software meter, and it's not necessary, but I rely on metering quite a lot when I'm mixing, and it's nice to have it on a separate screen, always visible, and just that's something I've been wanting for a while. So I got this,
That is by far the nerdiest audio engineer toy ever.
Yeah, it kind of is, but it's really cool. And then
don't get me wrong, I'm
think,
jealous,
no,
but it's so funny.
Yeah, totally.
It's not like a distressor or like some cool like tube preamp.
No.
It's a meter that.
yeah. But it looks cool, when you play music and there's lights, and stuff going on.
Totally. I get it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure there's somebody out there that's like, what?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's not just that it looks cool, impressive. I actually know what those numbers are meaning. So
yeah.
So yeah, there's that, and then the other one. I can't show this one. Or maybe I can. The other
you
one,
got two things.
Yeah, is this.
Oh, okay. I can kind of see what it is, but I can't really. Oh, is that an SSL?
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's not as cool as it looks, actually. No, it is. It's just a controller, and I've been trying a thing now where I don't need any more gear or plugins or anything at this point. At the moment, I feel like I'm very happy with everything I have. But what I've noticed lately is, and probably because I took a break in the summer and went on vacation with my kids, since I came back, I'm having a lot of fun mixing. I think it was really a necessary break. And what I've discovered now is that I enjoy mixing intuitively and kind of I don't know, differently a little bit than compared to what I did before. So I still use meters and stuff, but I really enjoy mixing, reacting to the music, and kind of not looking at what I'm doing so much on like EQs and compressors and stuff. So long story short, I use my controller way more than I did before, like my faders that I have here, and I use them like almost like mixing on a console more than anything now. And I wanted something where I could EQ and compress or control the stuff of my EQ and compression without seeing the plugin and with like actually touching knobs. And so SSL has this controller that supports their native plugins that I use a lot, their SSL channel strip and also the SSL bus compressor. And you can, on this thing, it looks like an SSL channel strip and the bus compressor with the meter as well. And so you can select any channel on that thing without having to select it in the DAW. So it doesn't show up on the screen. I can just select it here, and then I can EQ with just the knobs, and I don't see what it does on like a graph or something. And I always see my bus compressor at all times. I see the VU meter moving. I see the parameters there. I see how hard I'm hitting my mix bus without having to open the plugin. And I see the input and output of the channel that I've selected. And so I can now, with my faders here and this tool here, do the entire sort of rough mix or first phase of the mix. So basic EQ, compression, levels, and in automations and stuff, without having to open a single plugin, which is awesome. I just see,
cool.
I just hit play and I just go through the channels and just listen and react. And then I can always go into the fancier plugins and do some, fine tweaking. And it's been a real fun way of mixing lately. And so basically what I'm trying to do is not get another tool for sound, but like trying a different workflow and seeing if that leads to different results, if it inspires me, and if it's like a different way of mixing that is fun. And if I don't end up liking it, I'm going to send it back or sell it. But so far, it's been a lot of fun. So
fantastic. Yeah, no, that's really cool, man. I'm excited to see how this workflow develops for you. And yeah, if you're thinking it's getting better results, ultimately, because that's the end goal, I'm sure.
Totally. The only bummer is I love the Brainworks SSL consoles and stuff so much, and those don't work with that controller. You can only use the SSL native stuff. But maybe it's a limitation that's good. If I figure that this is all I really need, then cool. 5 less plugins to worry about.
Manually write the MIDI to the controller?
No, it is designed by SSL to automatically work with those. Like every knob has exactly one function, and it's just
right. But it's ultimately a MIDI controller, right?
I don't actually know how it works. You need the SSL 360 software is what they call it. It's like a software mixer that recognizes this thing, and then you calibrate the meter, and then you don't have to do anything. You don't have to even select it as a MIDI controller in the DAW. It just works. You just
right. I still wonder if you could like go in and train.
Oh no, you can't.
Learn other plugins.
No, you can't. It's not a MIDI controller. It doesn't even show up as a MIDI controller in the DAW. It just, you install the software, it's plug and play, you install the software, and then you open up a session, and automatically the SSL plugins are on that thing and nothing else is, but you can't do anything else with it.
All right. Well, at least they're good plugins.
Yeah, and it looks exactly like a SSL channel strip, so every knob has exactly one function. and it's like it even has the same colors and the same knobs as the console, so it's very intuitive. I just look at it and know exactly what I'm doing. So, yeah,
Cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's definitely fun.
All right. Well, that's about 16 minutes of banter
Yeah.
for our listeners.
Totally. At least some
Most
some
of
kind
it was on
music related.
topic. Most of it was on topic.
Exactly. So let's get to the episode. Yeah, as we said, we get to work on a lot of different songs every month, and many of them are home recordings, and which I'm excited about because that's what we're all about. And it's cool to see that so much art coming from home studios and bands from all over the world. But naturally, those source tones often have problems, right? Because it's not professional to record them. And so we always try and optimize at the source, at least I do, and I think you do the same, Malcolm, with like the artists we're working with. So whenever there's an opportunity to coach them or give them feedback, and we try to do it, but still sometimes they're sending us tracks that where it's just too late, they can't do anything about it, and we have to kind of deal with it. So we thought, because we're explaining this stuff all the time to the people we're working with, we might just as well explain it to you so you don't even run into these situations. And by the way, these things are not only important if you're working with someone else, and not only if you're sending it to a mixing engineer, but also when you're mixing yourself, because you don't want to sabotage yourself and you want to give yourself the best chance of creating an awesome mix and, make it more creative and straightforward and a less frustrating sort of experience. And also, final note here before we finally get to the mistakes is that none of these things have to do with not having some sort of gear. Anything that would, like, there's nothing in it that would cost you lots of money. Everything we talk about here, these are all things you can control and fix with the things you already have. And so let's get to our lists that we have here, or to a little list of a couple of things that we picked, and go through these. And there will be more episodes like this because there are... it happens all the time, unfortunately. And our mission is to do this as often as we need until it doesn't happen anymore. So let's start with the first one, Malcolm. This you brought that up, so I'm curious to hear the ins and outs of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is broad ultimately, but there's a lot of the ways this can go wrong. But it's arguably the most important thing about your drum recording, and that is getting your overheads right. And we're going to talk about a couple common mistakes we see with overheads recording. I know we've said it before on the podcast, but if you're new, like, overheads can easily be the most important part of your drum recording. They should sound like a really great drum kit just by themselves generally. There are, of course, exceptions where you like set them really close and low to like just be essentially spot cymbal mics. But even then, it still sounds pretty banging when you get it right. It should sound like a fun drum kit for sure. And there's some things that go just terribly wrong. And the one that's like my biggest pet peeve is when you've got a spaced pair. So everybody hopefully knows what a spaced pair is. Mics split off onto each side of the kit. Two mics, a left and a right. We won't get into which is which if you're the drummers or the audience perspective. But when they are then...
There's only one right way to do it, by the way. Sorry.
You bastard.
There's only one right way to do it.
For the record, I think Benny and I disagree on this. I think...
Really?
Yeah, I am audience perspective.
Ah, shit. No, man. There's like... no way.
Yeah.
No, drummer's perspective is the only way. I wanna air drum. Anyway, go ahead.
You know what I notice when I see drummers listening to my songs, they still air drum. They don't notice.
I don't believe it. But yeah. Okay.
And you know what? Drummers also do at concerts. They air drum to their audience perspective.
You're totally right, I guess. Yeah. Anyway,
all right. So you got a space pair. If you're on YouTube, you can see my goofy hand gestures here. One mic over the hi-hat side, one over the ride. And then my pet peeve is when those get tilted in so that they're both pointing to the opposite side of the kit. And to me, that makes literally zero sense. You've now got the mic farthest away from the hi-hat pointed directly at the hi-hat, so getting a more on-axis sound of the hi-hat. And then the mic farthest away from the ride is pointing at the ride, and that's your on-axis sound for the ride, which is farther away, so going to be less clean of a capture of those two sources, but also means that the sounds under those microphones are off axis and going to be essentially worse usually. So okay, you've got like your captures, kind of your on axis captures totally opposite, and And the theory, I think why people think this is a good idea is because we always say like your snare needs to be in the middle. You need to get your snare center between those two. So you're kind of trying to point your snare at both the mics. But in reality, you're just
going to point the snare at both. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're kind of aiming them at the snare.
Yeah.
And like I can see how that makes sense. But if you remember what I just said about now your hi-hat is more directly in the far mic away from it.
Yes.
Now your stereo image is just totally wonked, right? So somebody hits the hi-hat and you hear it more clearly in the wrong side of the drum kit. It's a bummer.
Yeah, it's closer to the one above, but the other one is aiming at it, which is really weird. Like,
Exactly. So not only is the image totally wrong, your phase is super wonky, and you end up with this very comb filtery kind of sound where like all of the cymbals have this kind of like thing to it. And it's a blanket of badness across your entire mix for the entire song that you just cannot get rid of. It is so upsetting.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, I often do the exact opposite of that, especially when what I love to do is like with ribbon mics where you have a figure of 8 pattern, I slightly tilt them to the outside of the kit, just slightly, not drastically, because then the null of the mic is pointing to the other side of the kit, which is the opposite effect of what you just said. And then you have a very wide image where it's like a lot of separation between left and right. It's sometimes too extreme, but if I tilt them, I'd rather do that and get some more isolation between left and right than do the opposite. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So now the general setup is 2 small diaphragm condensers. That's what we generally see people throw up. And what I would suggest as a starting point is just aim straight down, directly down. And then we still need to, like you if you were doing this other way, your assumption of getting the stereo image centered with the snare sounding like it's in the middle is a really good thing to still try and do. But you don't do that by aiming the microphones. You do that by moving the microphone, still aiming straight down. That's kind of the trick. And I do want to point out that I'm sure somebody legendary has done what I just said don't do and had great results. But in general, you're going to have better results if you don't do that. And I do also see that technique of aiming them inward on stage at like every festival I ever go to. And there's got to be a reason. I'm not a live sound mixer, so I don't know why that seems to be the case, but I notice it all the time. And I think it's probably a rejection thing that they're trying to avoid the spill of other instruments and wedges and stuff like that. I think that's got to be why they're doing it, but I also don't really know. But generally in the studio, like that'll be a 25% easy improvement on your drum sound by just changing the orientation of where your mics are tilted.
100%. Yes, period.
Go
ahead. Mm-hmm.
Same thing with your room mics.
Yeah, depends on where they are, but the closer they are to the kit, the more this is true, definitely. If they are like very far away in some corner or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But
it's essentially a mute point, But if they're like the 6 foot away close mic kind of thing, it's the same principle.
Yeah. Now, the only thing where this might sound counterintuitive or like where you're wondering why that then works, the only exception would be, it's not really an exception, but what I want to say is if you do an XY, meaning the capsules are like a 90 degree angle, exactly aligned at the center of, somewhere in the center of the kit, above the center of the kit, it looks like you're doing a similar thing, but you're not. So this works because the capsules are in the exact same place, so you don't have any phase issues anyways, because there's no time difference between left and right. And then also, one is facing that way, the other one is facing that way. If you're watching on YouTube now, it's a 90 degree angle. So it looks like they are sort of crossing, like in the example that Malcom just described, but they are in the same place. And so it's different, and you can absolutely do that. But if they are apart and you're doing kind of the XY angle, then it's where you get into trouble. And not only because of all the things that Malcom just described, those are reasons enough, but there's other negative side effects actually that come with that, because you might be pointing, like with any angle, you have to be careful, because you might be pointing at the edge of a cymbal, for example, and if you're not coming from right above, but from somewhere from the side, the movement of the cymbal in front of the mic like this will cause another sort of fluttering, weird effect where the cymbal moves when you hit it, and it every time it crosses sort of where the microphone's pointing at, you have this null, and then you have an increase and a decrease in level above and below that. And so you have this fluctuating, moving, weird cymbal wash. Whereas from above, if the cymbal moves, there's always sound pressure. There's no null at the moment where the cymbal sort of moves past the microphone diaphragm, if that makes sense. And like a lot of these things. And so yeah, come from straight above. And you have another episode, by the way, on this. It's called Overheads Are Not Just Cymbal Mics. So to me, there's two approaches, and we've discussed this, where they can either be cymbal mics or they always capture the whole kit, but the priority can be cymbals or a representation of the entire kit, including shells. So you got to make that decision. Either way, make sure kick and snare are center of the image, and then decide if you want to focus more on the shells or the cymbals, as I said. And whenever possible, I'd say, even when you focus on the shells, try and not aim at the edges of any cymbal. Try to make the movement of the cymbal below the mic minimal. So if possible, aim at the center or somewhere close to the center of a cymbal. Avoid drastic angles. And just make sure, basically the only thing you really have to do is listen to the overhead recording, the stereo recording of those two, like pan them hard left and right, listen to it, and make sure that kick and snare are center, and that the top end sounds really clear. Like you can hear where the cymbals are. So the stereo image has to be clear. And the highs shouldn't sound like a bad MP3, because that's what it kind of sounds like, this weird cancellation thing in the top end. You got to get used to it a little bit, or you have to learn how to hear that. But you definitely don't want that. You want a clear, defined top end with clear separation, a clear stereo image, and the kick and snare in the center, and you just don't stop moving the mics until that happens. That's basically it.
Yeah, you listen. And I think it seems to me that hearing that comb filtering phase issue is tricky for beginners. I don't think they notice it right away. Maybe their monitoring's kind of not very well treated, and it's just hard. And drums are hard to, in a DIY setup, you probably don't have an isolated control room, you know? So if you're trying to listen while the drummer's hitting the drums, you won't have a clue what's happening. Yeah. Right? Unless you have like a perfectly isolated room, because you're hearing the drums in the room. So you have to record and then listen without the drums actually being played. That's a really good thing to think about too.
You want a good picture of the entire kit from just the overheads, basically. Until it sounds like a drum kit, it doesn't have to have the most, like the punchiest shells or whatever, but it should sound like a drum kit where everything has, everything is in place, everything is where it's supposed to be, because this also tells you what you have to support. So you will notice if some cymbal is quieter than all the others, and then you got to put a spot mic there. It tells you a lot about what to do with the rest of the mics. So that is one thing. And then what always helps is just listen to a lot of your favorite recordings and productions from other people, and just learn to hear the top end properly. Just listen to those records, listen to just the cymbals. If you need to, just pull them into your DAW, put a low cut on it, and just listen to the top end and compare it to yours. And then at some point you'll notice what we mean here, and you should notice a drastic difference in clarity and separation and stereo field in general. And just repeat that exercise. Listen to a lot of records that way. Until you get close to it. Yeah.
Yes. Now, I got 2 pro tips and techniques to discuss here that I think are really important. Number 1 is this panning thing. Benny just mentioned pan one hard left, one hard right, and listen to them together to get your stereo image. And that is 100% correct. Do that every time. And why I'm mentioning this is because you might have seen on some mixing tutorial somewhere, somebody change that panning to correct stereo image on something they're mixing. And that is because it wasn't done correctly in the tracking phase. If they'd done it correctly in the tracking phase, they would just left it hard left and hard right. But it's because the snare and kick weren't centered in that image that they had to manipulate it to try and make that happen with panning. So when you are tracking, 100% hard left, hard right, and move the mics, not the pan knob, to get that image right.
Absolutely. Because you mentioned it when we started talking about our outline today. Bonus thing, maybe you got the mic positions exactly right and everything we talked about, and it still sounds weird and like this kind of phasey top end. Another reason for that could be that those mics are very close to the ceiling and there's no absorber above it. Or the drum kit is very close to a wall without any absorption. So if you got any kind of early reflections from like hard surfaces, the walls, or most commonly the ceiling, you get not only the sound directly from the kit into the overheads, but also the reflection from that ceiling or the wall And because it's so close, it will arrive almost at the same time as the direct sound. And it will be, so what the mic is going to be capturing is a mix of the cymbal sound and whatever's coming back from the walls. And this will also cancel out, will sound phasey, and can create a really like big mess. And so having a cloud above the drum kit, some sort of, thick, loose absorber type of thing that just helps so much. And also around the drum kit, if you can build a fort or just put mattresses against the wall or whatever, it's just the closest walls. If you can treat that, it's going to be 100 times better. You're going to have less bleed in every mic. You're going to have less phase issues. The walls further away are not so much an issue because sound, takes time to travel across the room, and then we'll perceive it more as a room sound, and our brain can separate that from the direct thing. But anything that's really close to it, avoid it at all costs. This is really oftentimes the case. It's one of the most common problems with small room drum recordings, I'd say.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I can't believe we almost missed that. Yeah, that's almost the same thing as like,
yeah,
I can instantly hear if the drums were recorded with the mics pointed in, and then I can instantly hear if it was recorded with a low ceiling. Anything you can do to get a taller ceiling is good.
Oh yeah, taller ceiling helps as well. If the ceiling is really high, you maybe don't have to have any sort of absorption. In most small rooms, definitely put something on the ceiling there. And the thing about the overheads, why it's so important also is that it's the one thing you really have to get right when you're recording real drums, because if there's a problem with the close mics, there's ways to fix it. We can work with samples, we can manipulate it in all kinds of ways, but with the overheads, unless you want us to completely reprogram the drums, the overheads are going to stay there, and they are such a big part of the sound of the record. And honestly, they are often what makes a record sound expensive or amateur. It's like if that just isn't right, it's just not right. It just doesn't work. And so it's so important. It's really the one thing you have to nail, even if you get everything else wrong, I'd say.
Absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree. It's not really fixable. You can just polish it a little bit and try to like honestly, if we had a worst case scenario, low ceiling, no treatment, and they're crisscrossed and not there's no stereo image taken into consideration, I'm going to try not to use them as much as possible. And try and let bleed through on other mics. Sometimes those will sound better than the overheads for the cymbals, and hopefully you've got a room mic that can save the day. It really can just be like a total deal breaker, which is why Benny and I are so passionate about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, funny side note, when we started the self-recording band, or when I started it 4 years ago, I think 2019, and I sent out the first couple of emails and I wrote some blog posts. That was how I started. I remember a mastering engineer, pretty famous mastering engineer from Germany who I've worked with before. He signed immediately signed up to my email list back then, and he got one of the first emails where I was just asking people about, their biggest problems, what I should make content on, and I just wanted to get a feel for what problems are. And that mastering guy, who's worked for all kinds of very big artists, as well as thousands of amateurs probably in home recordings, he immediately got back to me and said, overheads, 3 exclamation marks. So that mastering guy has had fix a lot of weird top end mixes, I guess. So that was the first thing he immediately sent, was tell people how to record overheads properly and balance them.
Oh, totally. We still had a couple things here. So if you have a low ceiling, and I mean, like Benny said, do whatever you can to treat it. Staple something to the ceiling. I don't care. Give her. But play with your height. The lower you go, there's trade-offs to going low. They become more spot mic you're going to get, the cymbals are going to be much more direct sounding if you get low, but the ceiling gets farther away. So you are changing that signal to noise ratio of the reflection and improving that. And that can be necessary. So keep that in your back pocket. And then
also the lower you get, if you have a spaced pair, the bigger the difference between the mics relative to the distance to the kit, the less likely you are to run into phase issues. So yes, there's a trade-off. It's more direct, but it's also less likely that you could run into phase issues because the mics are closer to the direct source, and those sources are different from one another, and so you get less phase issues. The higher you get, the more similar the things are that those mics are recording, the less likely you're going to run into phase issues. So there's pros and cons to both. But when in doubt, I'd say in small rooms, try going a little lower and still find a spot where it doesn't sound like you're just miking one cymbal. right?
Yeah,
So
definitely. And with your mics aiming down, not.
yeah, yeah.
I would say the lower you go with your mics facing in, the worse things get.
Yeah,
It
maybe
gets,
that is also a reason,
confusing.
though, why people are doing it. Maybe because of, I haven't thought about it, but think about it. Maybe because of the low ceiling, and then trying to get away from it and trying to stay close to the kit. That in an effort to still capture the whole kit, they angle it to not just get the cymbal below it, right? So maybe they're trying to get aim across the kit in an attempt to capture more of it. So that I could see that, as
I could see that, but the same thing applies. Just move your mic, not your.
Do an XY in the middle of the kit, though, because in small rooms, when the room sounds terrible and you need to get close to the kit, just do the XY, because then you have the angle across the entire kit, but you don't have the phase issues. You can get close. You will have more punchy shells and everything. And then if you feel like a cymbal is too quiet, just put a spot mic there. But I would rather do an XY than try 100%. To do some wonky, space pair.
Yeah, we keep stumbling upon, we're trying to fix a problem, but it could all be solved with XY.
Yeah.
XY is so hard to mess up. It does sound really good. I prefer a space pair generally.
Yeah, if done right.
If done right in the right room with good gear, generally with great cymbals, an XY is just like this is going to work. Just go for it. That's a great point. But on the topic of doing space pairs still, I do want to mention measuring. And this is there's no reason not to do this, in my opinion. A measuring tape is a fantastic thing to have, of course. And you can just measure from your center of kit, or there's schools of thought here. I like to do this line through the kick and snare and figure out a center of kit kind of spot that is going to put both of those instruments in the center, right? Because your kick and your snare aren't in a line if you're looking straight. It's kind of a diagonal thing. Right?
There's a trick to getting that right, by the way. I don't know if you do that, Malcolm, but you can use a cable and you hold it. You hold the end of the cable down at the center of the snare, and then you take the cable and make it straight and touch one of the mics. And then the other end, somewhere in the middle of the cable, you're touching the mic. And then the other end of the cable goes down, and you fix that, you attach that to the center of the kick drum. So you have this triangle. So between the snare and the kick drum, and you have a triangle. And then you keep it, both sides of it straight. And then you move the entire triangle to the other side and try to reach the other mic. And that way, the distance to both the snare and the kick is the same. You don't always have to do it exactly like that, but there's an easy way of achieving that.
Yeah. The entire principle is make it the same distance to all things, but that is a great way of pulling it off. And you can do it with measuring tape, or like Benny just said, a mic cable will do in a pinch, right? It doesn't really matter. I mean, there's definitely people that would say it does matter what amount of inches you're going with. There's recommended inches based on the height of the room and based on the height of your snare off the ground and stuff like that. And if you're going to be doing multiple drum recordings that you want to match, you should actually note that stuff. I think that's really smart, so you can try and recreate it closely. But in general, who cares if it sounds good? So just get them to match. So just why not measure, right? Then you're not guessing on if your mics are placed pretty well. And you are going to get frustrated. You're going to be like, to make my far overhead the same distance, it's now way inside past my ride and my floor tom. So how do you have to shift things and figure it out and make it work.
Yeah. And what's going to happen likely is that it's not going to be what you often see on stages, for example, where the mics are in front of the drummer left and right, but probably one is going to be somewhere between from drummer's perspective, the left crash and the hi-hat, and the other one's going to be somewhere over the floor tom and right, which is totally fine. And if you feel like the second crash, to the right of the drummer is too quiet then or whatever, just put a spot mic there. But it's usually, those mics are going to be left and right of that line through the kick and the snare, basically. So one is going to be somewhere, over the right shoulder of the drummer, to the right somewhere, and the other one is to the left front. And that's perfectly fine.
That brings up a great point, Benny, in that they're not, if you're facing the drummer, if you're in line with the kick, they're not parallel. They're not, I don't even know how to describe this. They're not the same distance away from you, right? It's at this kind of angle, and that looks unnatural. And I definitely had I was doing this documentary on drumming, and the the director was like, "Is this right?" Because like one's further back, and I'm like, "Yes, trust me."
Yeah. Exactly,
Everything
totally.
is fine.
And when you listen to it and you hear the picture, you won't question it because it just works, and it's the right way to do it. Yeah. And of course, there's always the exception. I know people are going to be like, yeah, but as you said, I've seen this picture where they did it exactly the other way. Sure, there's always the exception, and not everyone measures the distance and stuff. But if you do it, you won't be far off, at least. Like, you're going to be in the ballpark. And I think you should only break rules if you intentionally break them and you know what you're doing. And if you're not sure what you're doing, then just stick to those best practices and you won't be wrong. So
yes, yeah, we're kind of beating the dead horse, but I think really picture that mics in and why that's a bad idea concept in your head, and you'll learn a lot about phase and how to set up mics in general.
Yeah.
If you just picture the time of that imaginary hi-hat reaching that far mic versus the mic right above it, that really does good things for your brain and understanding, oh, right, that's kind of a weird thing to do, because people do stuff like that all the time on stereo miking, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, true. All right, let's get to the next one here, because we have two more, and those will be a little quicker, I think, but just as important. So
yeah, we started on the juicy one.
Yeah, exactly. Intentionally. So what's the next one? That's also coming from you, Malcolm. So what happened?
So this one is about clipping that you can't see on your interface, because that is, most interfaces these days have something to indicate that you are clipping it, right? If maybe there's a meter, like my Apollo Twin here has a little meter that goes from green to yellow to red, and red is a clip, and there's even a little C that tells me clip. And that is bad. Generally, right? We can safely assume we're not trying to clip our signal on the way in. We want to, have a clean, unaltered signal. And the problem that we're describing here, though, and the mistake that we've seen come in, is that that's not the only place something can clip. If you have anything else in your recording chain, there's potential for clipping at each input stage, essentially. So, or output stage, actually. So say, like, the easy example would be running into like a compressor. If you've rented a compressor for your vocal recording or something, not all compressors have like distortion notifications, essentially. Like you've got a gain meter that moves and shows how much compression you're doing, and that doesn't tell you if you're distorting it, right? That just tells you if you're compressing it, and that's like generally what you're trying to do. So if you crank the heck out of that, you're going to get distortion. And some compressors have little input preamps as well that you can clip. Like you can clip any stages. I'm just saying the same thing over and over. But boiled this down to its concept is that you need to gain stage correctly at every single opportunity through your entire chain. And the mistake I most recently saw, I won't call it the band, but it's fine. I've done it too, guys, is a UAD console plugin, which, if you're not familiar with the UAD interfaces, you can record through plugins and record through them. So it's like destructive recording. So if you use a compressor, or in this case, a Neve preamp, to record your vocal through, and you drive that preamp too hard, you will clip and distort that signal on the way into Pro Tools, and or your DAW, there's no taking that back. You've committed it as if it was a piece of hardware. And that can be good if you do it correctly, but in this case, it was bad. And why it happened is that this distortion option, this driving this preamp plugin, doesn't get represented accurately on the meter of the interface itself. So you're not seeing red on the interface, so they just assumed, well, there's no red, we're not clipping. But they were, in fact, clipping. So it's really like you have to be more careful than just looking at one spot, looking at the meter on your interface, for example. You have to check everything else, and you really have to use your ears as well. And then as an extra safe backup, you can actually look at the wave file that you recorded and see if it is chopped off.
Yeah, totally. And it's... Yeah, nothing to add here. I think the one thing I kept thinking about is when to intentionally use those plugins to create a sound and clip them, and when it's a bad thing, But I'd say if it's like, as always, if it's not intentional, it's probably bad. And if it's like random, where just the peaks are clipping, it's mostly bad. So if you want to distort something, you probably want it to be some sort of like consistent distortion or saturation. So yeah, and when in doubt, just don't do it. Probably just do it intentionally if you really want it, and otherwise, be careful with it. Yeah.
The problem isn't clipping. The problem is not knowing you're clipping.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's what we're trying to educate about, is just like you need to make sure that all of the input stages are set up correctly. And you know, even honestly, even your microphone can clip. Like there's a potential for clipping anything. So you just have to make sure that whatever's meant to be happening is happening.
Absolutely. By the way, talking about microphones and gains, totally unrelated, but it just came to mind. Did you hear the new about the new Shure SM7 thing that they released yesterday?
Yes. Absolutely.
I think it's relevant for our audience, but like I will just tell you guys, if you don't already have an SM7, the mic that we always recommend, like a dynamic mic that sounds really great, Shure just released a new version of that yesterday, which is the exact same mic, but they finally integrated like a preamp into the mic, so you don't have to have a cloud lifter or a fathead anymore. I haven't tried it yet, but that's what it's supposed to do, and I think we can trust them that it works. So now you finally have an SM7 with more gain and less noise, and so you can now record beautiful levels without, you know, the noise floor that was always annoying. So now is the time to get an SM7, I think.
Totally. I want one.
Yeah. Although I have one, I kind of want one too, just because I think it's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I sold mine and got this pod mic, which is great as well. But I think I preferred the SM7. It was just I didn't like having to have the extra accessory to make it loud. So it kind of solved the problem for me.
Okay. Don't you use the cloud lifter or the fathead with that one?
I do not. No.
Really? Oh, no. Because I know quite a few people who have that same mic but still use a fathead because it's got kind of the same problem as the SM7. At least that's what they're telling me.
I don't find that to be the case. I'm not turned up much at all.
Okay, yeah, and you have a good preamp also, so...
Yeah, I do, yeah. That is definitely, maybe with the Focusrite. I mean, I haven't used a Focusrite in so long, I got to stop ragging on them. Their newer ones could be totally fine, but
they are
Gen
actually...
2, their Gen 2 you would have had to turn it up a lot. Yeah.
I've heard the difference just not too long ago between the Gen 3 and the Gen 4 of the Scarlett that just came out, the Gen 4. And because I've heard good things about it and I finally got to hear it, and from just a quick test, like, I was impressed. The preamps are less noisy. The monitoring, like the conversion sounded like really better. You could tell, which is not often the case these days because converters are generally good. Latency is cool. They got an auto gain feature now. So I don't think at this point, like I might start recommending those again. So I didn't in the past. But
you have our heartfelt apology.
Yeah. yeah, exactly. No, I want to apologize for like talking shit about the old ones, but the new one is really good. No, I mean, people have made great records with the old ones too, but it seems to be a step up.
They're the only crappy product that I've constantly still recommended because it was actually the value was totally there. They were so affordable.
Yeah. Good. Back
again,
to the
now not crappy apparently.
Yeah, exactly. So it could be a good combo. Then you Focusrite plus the SM7, and you got a great, little chain there. Cool, awesome. Which is crazy to think about, by the way, because like you spend $700 or something, and you got a really, really cool, recording setup, which is mind blowing. But yeah, okay. Final thing on the list here. This is a classic. We've had it in another episode like this, but it was a slightly different situation, I think. And this is DIs and amps are not the same take. And so even if we already had that in the previous episode, sometimes, there's the saying, we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. So I'm going to say it again. The last time I also think I was talking about them trying to send the same take, but they messed up the comping, and so it wasn't the same take. This time, I'm talking about an artist and actually two artists, who sent a DI track for each guitar and an amp track for each guitar, and they did it because they thought they were doing the right thing. So I don't want to that like the intention was great, and they did want to do the right thing, but they misunderstood something. If you do that, if you track a DI and an amp for one guitar part, you want to do it for the same take. You want to split up the signal and record the DI and the amp or amp sim or mic or whatever at the same time. You want to record the exact same take, and you have to make sure that it stays that way. What they did was they recorded a DI or an amp, and then they did another pass and recorded the other thing, and then they sent the two together. And this is not the way to do it. I mean, you can do that, and I can then use it as a double or whatever. But it's not that you can blend the two, because what they did was they sent those things and they said you can create a blend, or you can reamp the DI and blend it with the other thing. But this sounds like two performances then. It's not the same thing. So if you really want to create a blend between the two, or give me the option to use either or, make sure it's the same. It's exactly the same take. Split it up.
Yeah. That's it's just you're doing extra work for less results if you're double tracking it. And I've had that issue a couple times as well. This isn't a common one, but when it does happen, it's like, poor Viper.
I feel sorry for them. Yeah, but because they said, I'm gonna, here's the DI as well in case, and I feel bad for them because, but I can only use either or. I can't use them both, or I can't do what I would usually do with it. And it's not like the safety net thing. It's like two different takes. So, yeah.
Exactly. And what I found is when that happens, both aren't that great. It's like they've kind of like split their focus. And like, you can just hear them being bummed out as they're recording just this DI track with no amp sound. You're like,
and it can't be that great
guitar performance.
And it totally, and it can't be that great because they didn't send the one awesome take. Like you're supposed to commit the one perfect, like best take you could pull off, and it should have both the DI and the amp. And when you send both, one of them will be better than the other. Inevitably, it's not going to be the one take. And then I either have to guess which one is better, or you have to tell me which one is better. And it's not ideal. Like, send the one take for each part, and ideally record both the DI and the amp, but at the same time.
Yes, that really is it.
Yeah. All right, those were our mistakes of this month. We got a few more that we didn't include because we've already been going for almost an hour. So we're gonna do another episode like that, and I think these are really fun. So it's for us, it's fun to talk about these things, and I think it's really helpful for you too, because ultimately that's what it's all about. I think it's much more, oftentimes, like any sort of education, I feel like is more about avoiding mistakes than it is about doing things exactly the way someone else does it. Like, if you avoid the most common mistakes, you will be much better off than before, and you will be on the right path. There's a lot of different ways to get to the goal, as long as you avoid the most common mistakes. You can find your own path, you can do whatever you want, but don't like fall into these traps.
Absolutely. And I think it's easier to understand why we recommend certain, like, the techniques when you understand why something doing it wrong is a mistake, right? So, like, in theory, of understanding the phase problems introduced with a bad overhead setup gives you an understanding of how to set up proper techniques, and not just we talked about space pair for most of that episode, but the same phase principles apply to any overhead setup. So it's like it gives you just an understanding on a deeper level when you think about mistakes.
Yeah, totally. And I always think about it like, if someone asks me for a way from here to there, they are here and they want to get to this point, I think of it as like a map, and I don't have to show them the exact way, as long as they know, like, here's a cliff and here's a trap and there's, a train crossing or whatever. As long as you avoid these deadly things, you will get to the other side. And, there's different ways to get there, but just don't fall off the cliff. Don't fall into this thing, and don't get run over by the train.
Yeah. And in fact, you might have missed a turn, so you just got to go backwards and redirect.
Yeah, exactly. So I think these are valuable episodes. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Cool.
Yeah,
All
that
right.
was about 15 minutes of running and Evertune chats, 40 minutes of Malcolm pissed off about overhead setups, and then we hit 10 minutes to cover the second two options.
Yeah, exactly, which is fine. This just goes to show how important the drum thing is. Yeah. I wonder if there's a way to mess it up with like programmed drums, but probably if you use a good sampler, it's not, because they're tracked well. So
it should be pretty straightforward in that case. The issues would come in the mix at that point.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, we'll talk to you next week.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.